Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tom Sherman, State Senator from District 24. I've got an echo.
We have a lot of new technology that we're all getting used to.
Yeah.
So there'll be some glitches, so please bear with us.
So in case you're wondering what this is I'm wearing, this is the Tommy Moulton Hampton-made N95 mask made by Envo, and it's amazing. So it's super comfortable. If anybody wants one, let me know. And this is in keeping with new CDC guidelines that are coming out later this week. I'm here to introduce SB 438, FN Local. It establishes state and local procurement policies intended to promote the use of American materials. Currently, certain federal contracts, especially in transportation, require the use of American-made materials. In New Hampshire, we do not require this for state-funded projects. Foreign producers, due to governmental support, favorable tax structures, and/or exchange rates, are able to offer their products at such low prices that our own in-state manufacturers cannot complete. We have 4 major steel fabricators in New Hampshire. In Greenland, we have a family-owned and run major steel fabricator known as, or called Novel Ironworks. Holly Novoletsky reached out to me. She's here today. She is a constituent and pointed out that due to the lack of requirement that state projects use American-made fabricated steel, and due to the favorable economics that I mentioned above, they are not able to even bid on major projects such as school construction within the borders of our own state. There's been movement in state legislatures across the country to level this playing field to support American-made products by ensuring that they are utilized in these publicly funded projects. One critical lesson we have learned during COVID is the price of outsourcing manufacturing beyond U.S. borders. Whether it's PPE, plexiglass ventilators, or other products essential to protecting the health of Americans during the pandemic, the lack of availability within the United States created significant barriers to access during the crisis. Supporting U.S.-based manufacturing, as anticipated in this bill, ensures that there will be high-quality production on America's soil, supports local job growth with excellent wages and benefits, and represents a direct investment in our own businesses and economy. While some may claim this may drive up costs, at least 21 states have laws that require government preference for American-made products and materials. 38 states have in-state procurement preference for manufacturers, and specifically, every $1 spent on domestic fabricated steel has generated about $1.50 in subsequent economic activity. Pretty good return on investment. Similar legislation passed recently in New Jersey and did so unanimously in Texas. It is now under consideration in Massachusetts. Interestingly, countries that represent current foreign sources of similar products allow their regional governments and provinces to pass the exact same type of protections contemplated in this bill to support their own local industries. While allowing for appropriate exemptions, this bill otherwise requires the state to reinvest taxpayer dollars in our own local, regional, and statewide economies. I urge you to support our New Hampshire businesses by moving this bill on to the full Senate with an ought-to-pass recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Senator. Are there any questions for Senator Sherman? Senator Reagan.
Senator, on the page 2, there's a typo in number 1 on line 4, which is a rare thing to see indeed. So,
with the gap?
Yeah.
Okay.
In D, you state that anybody who falsely affixes a Made in America label will be ineligible to receive any contract. Is that forever?
That's a good question. They would be ineligible if you wanted to put in a period of time, but we did not anticipate any criminal or other penalties. It was more to make them ineligible for the process in the future.
Are there any further questions for Senator Sherman? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Peter Stamnis. Do I have that correctly?
Stamnis, yeah.
Stamnis, okay.
Good morning, all. Peter Stamnis, Director of Project Development for New Hampshire DOT. I oversee the Highway and Bridge Program for the DOT. Here to not take a position on the bill, but to just explain how this might impact us as a DOT in our contract procurement. Federally funded projects for the DOT do need to comply with Buy America provisions, which are very similar to provisions in this bill. 85% of our projects are funded with federal funds. Buy America provisions, as they currently stand, are not required on state-funded projects. So projects utilizing turnpike funds or betterment funds or SB 367 funds do not include Buy America provisions for our contracts. This bill would effectively require DOT to comply with the provisions on 100% of our projects. In general, and I'm going to, again, my experience is on the federal side with Buy America provisions. Provisions will make it a little more difficult to procure manufactured products like vehicles. We have difficulty procuring vehicles with federal funds. I've encountered it a number of times. And so that's one of the things that we do have difficulty with. There are waiver provisions on the federal side for Buy America provisions, but they're very time-consuming, complicated to put together, and usually unsuccessful. And I think overall, the bill could lead to increased costs on state-funded projects. One of the things that we do have that's difficult in general is proving compliance with the federal requirements. So you need to prove that it's domestically sourced, the steel from the origin is domestically sourced, and the paper trail on that overall is difficult for us. So that's what I have for testimony.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Reagan?
You spell your last name.
S as in Sam, T as in Thomas, A, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy, A, S as in Sam.
Thank you for that. Second, I have a question. Would you be able to give us a copy of what the waiver process looks like on the federal side? Because if we do this, we don't want to create a process that's so different from the federal side that it's going to take a while for people to get used to it. So if we could create a process that mirrors what the federal government does, but have it at the state level, I think things would progress a lot easier. So if you could show us what the waiver process looks like, that would be terrific.
I can produce that.
Yes, and please send it either to our secretary, Ms. Wheeler, or myself, and we'll make sure that the committee all gets a copy, and Senator Sherman as well, so because it's his bill. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next, we are going to call Gary Abbott.
Thank you, Chairman Carson and Senators. For the record, my name's Gary Abbott. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Associated General Contractors of New Hampshire. I want to start off that I've read this bill over and over again and still trying to understand it, so I want to come to you with that. I also want to highlight in the bill, I think Senator Reagan had started highlighting some of the concerns and issues. I represent contractors both building and highway construction. As you just heard from Pete Stamnis of DOT, we have this Buy America for steel products in the DOT. And it's quite a process. It's been around for a long time. Pretty much from a contractor side, DOT tells the contractor which items they need to verify that it was made in America on those projects that have this requirement. That's why when I look at this bill, it's very vague as to what is covered and what is not covered. The dilemma for us is when we start looking at building constructions. In here it talks about administrative services. Keep in mind on the highway side, what the federal government's looking for is steel beams, those kind of things that are manufactured. They're special, they're a big amount of the contract, say for a bridge contractor. When you get into paving contract, there's really nothing there. So those regulations, if you talk to a paving contractor, is probably not as a big deal for many products. But for a bridge contractor, it's a big item. When I look at this bill, I looked at it and said, how do we spell out what we want? Because I know through the federal process, things like message boards, you see them going up along the highway. Those are not included. They contain steel items. They are manufactured, but there's so many of the products that go into the computer boards and the rest that are in those, it's not totally made in the US. And those are exempt. So when I get to building construction, I'm starting to think, if we have a wood frame structure that the Department of Safety wants built that has very little steel, maybe steel studs instead of 2x4s that a building contractor can go to the local supplier and get, does he have to verify it? This raises a number of questions. It opens up for, okay, is this only steel? Because I read parts of this bill, a lot of our wood products are, we cut down the trees in New Hampshire, we send them to Canada, and they come back as lumber. This bill would really affect. So when you start to limit where somebody can buy products, there's a cost aspect. And there's no doubt there's a cost aspect, and that's why the bill is put in. And we understand that. I looked at this bill and said, what would I do if this was proposed by an agency? And the other part is it's complicated by, are we talking just administrative services projects that are state funded only? Do they include the schools? I heard the sponsor say, schools, that's a different, is it if they get school building aid, does that mean your municipality has to comply? And do they understand how to do this process? It's more complicated than how this bill is written. I really stepped back and said, I need more information, or we need a test project, or there needs to be something done so you feel comfortable, because then I get to the waiver section, and the waiver section confused me as well. It really talks about waivers from the authority issuing the contract, but then I got confused about the 3 bidders or the 3 supply quotes. How is administrative services getting those quotes? It's the contractor who gets those quotes. It's not administrative services getting a separate quote. So I looked at those and said, I'm confused in how that's going to work in the bigger picture. Does a contractor have to get 3 quotes and then get a quote of somebody who doesn't use US, and if it's 25% over? The other number that's in here, it says you can get a waiver if it's 25% over the total contract. Doesn't talk about what percentage is steel in the contract. Should that have been 25% of, say, steel as the item? I know if you go to Government Council, if you're 10% over, you got problems. 25% seems an awful high number to have in this bill. So I'm saying from an association aspect, we have a lot of questions, concerned because how it's drafted. It has a blanket, but I don't know if supposedly administrative services is going to work all that out in rules. I don't know how this would actually, the details are not there. Maybe if it was fine-tuned so we know exactly that all products that represent 10% or more of the project, and there was a way to get these waivers and contractors understood it, maybe we could support it. But at this point, there's just so many vague parts of this bill. It raises a lot of concerns, and especially for building construction. Highway is a little bit, DOT does a great job, and they bid by item, so it's easier. When you get into building construction, it's like, build me this $4 million building. And it's not done by units, it's done by overall contract. And so that's where there's a difference with how the Buy America from the federal government and a state proposal. I know Maine tried a Buy America last year. It did fail in Maine. I know it may be different than what this bill is, but I just wanted the committee to know that it has an impact. So I would hope the committee maybe wants to look at this further, do a test project to understand what all the components are. And when I get into building construction, are we talking light fixtures that have metal in them? I mean, just what are we talking about? And the language just should be really clear. With that, I would end my testimony and ask the committee at this point that we do something other than right pass it. Maybe make sure we clarify it.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Mr. Abbott. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Holly Novoletsky.
Thank you, Chairman, President, and committee members. May I invite up to speak with me John Severini and Clifford Thornberry from American?
Sure, that's fine. Just make sure that they have chairs. And gentlemen, before you speak, just make sure you identify yourself for the record.
Sure.
Hi, I'm John Severini from Charles Leonard Steel Services, Concord, New Hampshire.
And I'm Cliff Thornberry from American Steel Fabricators in Greenfield, New Hampshire.
Good morning, and I'm Holly Novoletsky, owner and CEO of Novel Iron Works in Greenland, New Hampshire. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good morning, and we'd really like to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today about Senate Bill 438. My father founded Novel Iron Works in 1956. We're a third-generation, family-owned structural steel fabricator. And those of us who are lucky enough to work and live in New Hampshire realize that it's not just about supporting our companies and our families, but it's also our employees. We employ approximately 100 families from New Hampshire in my company alone. When I go out into the shop floor, I see brothers working together. I see uncles and nephews. I see fathers and sons. And at one time, I've even had grandfather, father, and grandson working out together. Many of our workers tell us how worried they are about the unfair trade practices that are threatening the survival of the American fabricated steel industry. And I know when I go around the state and talk to other fabricators that most people who work in the New Hampshire structural steel fabrication industry are also worried. Our industry provides good paying jobs with good benefits to almost 600 New Hampshire families. And that number grows exponentially when you take into account the subcontractors and the vendors that work and support us. The fabricated structural steel industry is an essential essential to building our nation and our state's critical infrastructure. We provide the structural steel framing for hospitals, schools, universities, water treatment plants, military installations, and government buildings. If we've learned anything from this pandemic, we've learned the hard and painful lesson that we need to rebuild and strengthen our domestic manufacturing. Can you only imagine how vulnerable the United States would be if we relied on foreign fabricated steel to build our critical infrastructure. Unfortunately, that is what's happening. Foreign structural steel fabricators have specifically targeted our domestic markets here in the Northeast. They benefit from currency imbalances, government subsidies, disparity in employee health and safety requirements, and much more. All of these issues make our domestic construction market a prized target for foreign fabricators. Open markets are a noble idea in an ideal world where the playing field is equal, but it's not equal in reality. In reality, our closest trading partner, Canada, has buy Canadian procurement policies at the local and provincial level. It's only a one-directional open market, and it's not in our favor. Our public tax dollars are meant to stimulate our economy and support our communities. Our public dollars must stay local to support our communities. New Hampshire steel fabricators are paying tax dollars to bolster our competition to our own demise. Without support of important Buy America legislation like Senate Bill 438, the domestic steel construction industry is at grave risk. We cannot continue to fund our competition. The downward price pressure in the market from foreign competition has significantly impacted not only our companies, but our employees. When profit margins are adversely impacted, it directly translates into one's inability to make needed capital investment, hire, increase wages, and add benefits. Many states and the federal government have already enacted Buy American procurement policies. The irony is the foreign countries that have targeted our domestic market have themselves instituted Buy Domestic. So I'm asking New Hampshire to do the same. Keep our public dollars local, or at least keep our domestic dollars domestic. Support Senate Bill 438 to ensure that any publicly funded construction requires the use of American steel and American fabrication. Without your support, foreign competition will continue to erode our fabricated structural steel industry and make vulnerable the construction of our critical infrastructure to foreign manufacturing. Thank you for your time on this matter. And if there's needed for refinement of the language, I would love to be a part of that process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Gentlemen, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to be very frank. Holly nailed it. Those are the exact challenges that Charles Leonard Steel faces. We need to win this work at a profit so that we can continue to increase employee benefits. We can continue to increase wages. We can buy innovative products that's going to allow us to compete. When we have to hit these rock bottom numbers that the Canadians come in with, you're taking work to keep the lights on. You're not taking work to grow. And so they have such a unique situation there, especially when we can't enter their market. And so, I don't want to be redundant. Holly nailed it. That's a real challenge of our industry currently. So I recommend that we give this bill an ought to pass. And like Holly said, if there's any questions, if there's any further rewriting, I'd like to participate. Thank you.
Sir, could you please identify yourself for the
John
record?
Severini, Charles Leonard Steel.
Okay, thank you. Sir?
Yeah, I'm Cliff Thornberry from American Steel Fabricators in Greenfield. So we're a medium-sized fabrication company. We currently employ 67 people in New Hampshire. We do work all over New England, and I'm going to speak a little bit anecdotally. I didn't have time to prepare a written testimony, but we're not asking for help with private projects. Private projects, the government has no control over, and they constitute probably 70–80% of the market. But when we go up against a project and we know somebody from Canada is bidding a private project, we don't even bother bidding because there's no possible way. They have about a 15–20% advantage. I lived in Canada for a year. I did major projects in Quebec. They get free electricity to run their plants. Steel fabricators are a high use of electricity. They have free government health care, so they pay it through their taxes, but they don't, the individual companies don't pay it. They have subsidies that make it very difficult to compete against. Now, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Bulk of my experience in the steel industry, I came to New England about 15 years ago. Just so anecdotally, see what can happen to an industry. When I started in the industry in 1974, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there were 88 operating blast furnaces. And the blast furnaces is where the steel gets melted down from the iron ore to make steel. Well, foreign competition came into the scene in the 60s and 70s with steel from China, steel from Russia, steel from South American companies. There's one operating blast furnace left in the Pittsburgh area, one out of 88. Our steel industry, compared to what it was in the 50s and 60s nationally, has been decimated. And my concern is the same thing is happening to the fabricated steel industry. Now, in the federal government's control, to their credit, they have put tariffs on foreign produced steel. Now, this isn't fabricated steel, this is raw steel. So, for instance, there's a tariff on raw steel coming from Canada or coming from China or coming from Russia that helps the domestic steel industry. But there are no steel mills in New England. So that's helping the domestic steel industry in the other part of the country, and it has helped. But there's no tariffs on a fabricated product. So if the steel gets made in Canada or Russia or wherever, and then they fabricate it and they ship it here, there's no tariff. So there's no protection there. I'd like to comment also on the one gentleman for the NHDOT that talked a little bit about the paper trail difficulties. Now, we do a lot of public work in other states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and a lot of them have and federal jobs, and they have the Buy America requirements, and you have to certify where you got the steel from. And there's a very easy procedure. You get what's called a material test report from the steel mill that shows what the steel mill was fabricated in, the steel mill in Arkansas or in Pittsburgh or whatever, and then you fill out a certification that you fabricated in your mill, and you submit it. And the federal process, it's almost there is a lot of paperwork. You have to submit all these reports to prove, but there are federal penalties. And I think there's a $25,000 federal penalty if you lie and you say that you bought it from the United States and you really bought it from Russia. So it's really, once it's in place, the paper trail system, once people learn how to do it, it's really not difficult. It just becomes another step that you do, and we have employees that do the paper trail and send in the documents that prove where it was manufactured. And I'd like to comment on the federal waiver process. That process is pretty good. And I'm not exactly sure in the bill what we actually have, but they have waivers that if you can't find it domestically, if it's not produced, and you're not required to meet that, or if it's not produced in a sufficient quantity to be commercially viable, like if they specify a certain kind of fastener and no one in the United States makes it unless you pay somebody to custom make it. So the waiver process is really not that difficult. And then I'd just like to throw out just a personal antidote. So there was a project recently in a local town right next to our town, and it was a municipal project, but it had some state funds, and we bid it, and we were told we were the low bidder, but then at the last minute, a Canadian fabricator came in and with a few $1,000s less than our quote, and were awarded the job. So my employees are asking me, why aren't we fabricating that building that's right down the street? I live in that town. I pay taxes in that town. I even contributed to the fund to build this project. Why aren't we doing it? And my answer is, I'm sorry, we just can't compete with the Canadian companies. So with that, I'll finish.
Thank you all very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you all very much. Next, we're going to call Margaret Burns. by
Oh,
those
okay.
chairs.
Get the chair,
Thank
sorry.
you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning. Margaret Burns, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Municipal Association. And we are here this morning in opposition to Senate Bill 434 because the way that we read it, it mandates that also local projects would have to comply with this requirement for American-made projects, products that are listed in Senate Bill 434. Our primary opposition is based on that it would dictate what can be contained in a municipal contract for a project. But as a sort of a technical issue with the bill, the waiver requirement that's listed in the bill only applies the waiver to state departments and agencies and does not similarly apply the waiver to municipal projects, school projects, or county projects. So logistically, municipalities would have to comply with this requirement, but they would have no ability to apply for a waiver as the state would be able to do. Potential consequences of the legislation, potentially increased costs, but I think more importantly, potential difficulties with simply complying with the requirements. This is particularly true for municipalities, which, unlike the state, are not accustomed to dealing with federal funds and complying with the federal American-made requirements. This would be a very new thing for them to grapple with in their projects. Many of them are seeing this for the first time with the use of the funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, which do have those federal requirements attached to it. But for the most part, municipal projects are not done with federal funds. And so the American-made products requirement is a relatively new thing for municipalities, especially smaller municipalities, to deal with. So we would be concerned with it from the administrative and logistical standpoint as well. For those reasons, we're opposed to the bill. It does not have anything to do with encouraging the use of American-made products, but simply sort of the logistical and administrative burdens that it would put on municipalities.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to call Michael Kilmette.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify in Senate Bill 438. My name is Michael Kilmette. I am Vice President of Rose Steel. Rose Steel is a family-owned structural steel erection and miscellaneous fabrication company. It's been in business for 40 years. We are located in Greenland, New Hampshire, with approximately 30 families. When American Steel Fabricator is awarded a construction contract, we are direct beneficiaries of that contract through subcontracting. Rose Steel is subcontracted to fabricate stairs, rails, and steel buildings, whatnot. We are a downstream reinvestment of those initial contract dollars. The public dollars that go to the domestic steel fabricator is used to contract with us. We in turn purchase additional workman's comp insurance, welding wire supplies, pay business taxes, property taxes, and wage benefits to our employees and more. Then in turn, our employees spend the wages on food, entertainment, and paying their local taxes. This is through the reinvestment of those initial contract dollars with the steel fabricator. Please support Bill 438. Its reach is extensive to supporting our local and families and communities. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we're going to call Stephen Chase.
Good morning, Chairperson Carson and the committee members. I'd like to ask if Adam Fallon can come up.
Yes, please, bring up a chair. Just remember, before you speak, to identify so we have an accurate record of who was speaking.
Again, my name is Stephen Chasey. I'm the owner and president of SL Chasey Steel in Hudson, New Hampshire. Adam Fallon is a vice president and risk consultant of USI New England. SL Chasey Steel has been in business for 32 years. We currently have over 170 employees. Most of our employees live in New Hampshire. Many grew up in New Hampshire. They pay real estate taxes in New Hampshire and have graduated from New Hampshire schools. Now they're raising their own children in New Hampshire and sending them to New Hampshire schools. I am here to testify from my own personal experience. SL Chasey Steel and my fellow New Hampshire and New England-based steel fabricators see more structural steel buildings being fabricated outside of the United States. New Hampshire state, city, and town tax dollars that are being used to fund municipal construction projects, state projects, federal projects, are going to foreign steel fabrication companies instead of local New Hampshire-based companies like ours. I see local schools that our employees' children attend being fabricated outside of this country. These children never have the opportunity to tell their classmates, my father or mother helped build this school, when in fact their parents pay tax dollars on these schools. Through the flawed procurement laws, our state, city, and town tax dollars, money meant to strengthen New Hampshire's economy, leaves the country when foreign steel fabricators awarded work on public construction projects. In effect, we're bolstering another country's economy instead of our own. The situation has gotten to a point where it's a waste of resources to even bid on these projects. It's a waste of time. Foreign steel fabrication companies are often financially subsidized by their governments and enjoy favorable currency exchanges with the United States, enabling them to repeatedly undercut, which they do constantly, American fabricators in the bidding process. When foreign fabricated steel is purchased, there is no economic benefit to the domestic economy. As I'm sure you know, local spending has a significant economic impact on the local and regional economies because of the multiplier effect. Local spending has multiplier impacts on employment, income, and tax revenues. Simply stated, for every dollar spent on domestic fabricated steel, $1.50 is generated in domestic economic activity. For every dollar spent on foreign fabricated steel, $0 are generated in our economy. Income associated with steel fabrication will result in income to local residents. This income will be spent on local goods and services at restaurants, lodging, hardware stores, and other local industries. If these public construction projects are awarded to foreign firms, then the economic benefit will be demonstrated in their economies, not ours. We need you, our state government, to support Senate Bill 438 and keep our tax dollars here in New Hampshire. Thank you for consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. Sir?
My name is Adam Fallon. I work with USI Insurance Services out of Bedford, New Hampshire. I grew up in Londonderry and actually live in Exeter currently. I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective. I'm certainly in support of the bill, but I actually spent 10 years in the welding industry working with companies such as representing themselves today for fabricators. And I've had the pleasure of also working with school boards at the community colleges, at the high school tech schools, and seeing what their programs can do and that they need jobs to be able to go to after they graduate from these programs. We certainly need more manufacturing in the United States. It's what made America great in the first place. It's been a struggle for the last 20 years or so in terms of what that looks like. I'd love to see more manufacturing here, continue to grow that segment. And the tech schools are certainly a part of that. Having a place for them to go is critical. From an insurance and risk management perspective, which is my current role, has been for the last 6 years, when companies like SL Chasey or Novel Iron Works grow and they hire more employees, things like workers' compensation premiums grow, if their exposures grow, and that all leads to higher premiums for insurance carriers and for insurance brokers, so that we can then hire more people, hire risk loss control personnel, account managers, other producers, people who can then go and help these companies impact their programs to not only make them safer, but to grow and become more profitable. I just ask that you support this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not have anyone else who has signed up to speak. Are there members of the public who would like to speak? Yes, ma'am, you are?
Amy Charbonneau from Continental Paving. I didn't sign up, but I just was kind of waiting to see how things went, if you needed.
Okay. Sure.
I'm Amy Charbonneau from Continental Paving. I would just like to say that, so we're a family business also. We employ 350 people in New Hampshire. I do not disagree with anything these gentlemen have said. We kind of feel the same thing in a totally different industry. So I just wanted, as the end user of all of this whole discussion, we build heavy highway, we do roads, we do pave, everything like, that if we could echo what Gary said and come to some sort of compromise. I mean, we fully support Buy in America, we support Use New Hampshire more than anything. I mean, we try and do that with everything we have. But to push pain from one family business to the next seems like we're just kind of shuffling a little bit of paperwork and pain. So I agree with what these gentlemen are saying, but I just want to say that it's sort of vague. So the paper trail problem, like, that's probably very easy. We do it for castings, we do it for pipe, and they're very correct. But the way the bill is written, are we talking nuts and bolts? Are we talking signposts on the side of the highway? I mean, I'm talking like stop sign signposts. So I believe that the intent is wonderful, but I do believe it needs some refining so that my office doesn't need 2 more people now to file waivers and follow paper trails and, you know, run into the same pain that they're feeling. So I just wanted to echo that we're the end user of that. I don't really disagree with anything anybody said here, but I do believe it's not written to support all family business in New Hampshire, and that we need to come to some sort of better wordage so that down the road, when a third-party inspector's out on my job, I don't have to spend 3 days trying to find a paper trail and a signpost. You know, it doesn't work. It's got to work in all facets, I guess, and then I would be not opposed to it. So I'm not necessarily opposed to the New Hampshire people and the Made in America, but we just got to refine the way it's written to help everybody.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Senator Sherman, would you like to speak again? Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. Listening to the testimony, the bill itself was patterned after what has passed in other states and what is pending in Massachusetts. But I think there's been some really great feedback, and I would like to, if it is okay with the chair and with the committee, to work on developing an amendment that would address those. I'd love to work with any members of the committee who would like to do that. But I think this is critical. I think this is very important for our New Hampshire-based businesses, and especially with what Mr. Abbott said and the last witness said, that I think we can come to an agreement that would be more specific, standardize the waiver with what's available federally, as you suggested, Madam Chair, and come up with an amendment that perhaps we could all support. If that, I'm volunteering to work on that if that's helpful.
Thank you, Senator Sherman. I was going to reach out to you and ask you, we've heard a lot of information here today, and on both sides, for and against, and it's obvious that it needs more work. And I was going to ask you, because you're familiar with the individuals, that if you wanted to take that on, that would be terrific.
I'd be happy to.
And I know I would be interested, because it's always good to learn about something new and different industries here in New Hampshire. So I would like to be involved with that as well. And okay. I'm not sure about anybody else, but I'm sure that they'll contact you.
Well, thank you. And I recognize there's an FN attached to it, so we will move with alacrity. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 348? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We're going to go ahead and open the public hearing on Senate Bill 434 FN and recognize the prime sponsor, our own Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the best committee in the state. Thank you for having me. My name is Kevin Kavanaugh. I represent Senate District 16, Bow, Candia, Dunbarton, Hooksett, and Manchester wards 1, 2, and 12. And I sponsor this bill. This bill provides for the application of the reduction of the retiree's annuity at the member's full retirement age under the federal Social Security system. As it stands right now, and I know most of you know this, is that if a state employee retires, their reduction by 10% to their benefit at the age of 65. Now the national age is 67, and what I want to do with this bill is to have those pair up together. So they're not going to get that 10% right now. Just easy math: $30,000 pension becomes 27 at 65, when their increase to Social Security doesn't come until 67. So that's really the basis of it. And I know we all have constituents from within our districts that are retired state employees, and I think it's a great way to let them know we care about what they did for the state and for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Kavanaugh. Are there any questions for Senator Kavanaugh? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to call Margaret Burns.
Good morning again, Margaret Burns with the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We are here this morning in opposition to Senate Bill 434. Catherine Heck, our government finance advisor, submitted testimony via email to the committee detailing in more detail our position. Admittedly, I am not the expert in our office on issues of finance and retirement. However, our position is based solely on the cost increase to municipalities and local governments if this legislation would pass. According to the fiscal note, it would increase NHRS's accrued liability and employer costs for political subdivisions by $4.26 million in 2024 and $4.38 million in 2025. We are not opposed to increases in benefits for retirees. Many of our municipal officials and employees become those retirees, but we are opposed to the increase in costs on municipalities, particularly in light of the trend of pushing down costs from NHRS onto local governments over the past several years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Burns. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we're going to call Marty Carlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Marty Carlin, representing the New Hampshire Retirement System. I had emailed the committee a handout just summarizing some of the history of the age 65 adjustment and the fiscal impact. I have paper copies if needed, and there's a few on the table. We'll post that on our website tomorrow for anybody in the audience who we don't have enough copies for. This bill would, as Senator Kavanaugh outlined, move the statutory pension recalculation for future retirees in Group 1 from age 65 to age 67, which is the full Social Security retirement age. Historically, when the retirement system was created in 67 and in the predecessor systems, there was a Social Security offset associated with the NHRS pension benefit that would reduce the pension when somebody began collecting Social Security. That decrease could be anywhere from 10 to 40%, depending on how much income they made over and above the Social Security limits at the time. In 1989, the legislature removed that linkage from Social Security to the NHRS benefit, but kept in place approximately 10%, it's a little bit less, statutory reduction to commence at age 65. If someone retired before age 65, they'd get one amount, and then the benefit would be recalculated after they turned 65. If someone retired after age 65, the lower formula is what they'd get all along.
At the time, the full Social Security retirement age to collect a full benefit was 65. Through legislation in the 80s, Congress changed the maximum minimum age to collect full Social Security benefits on a sliding scale. And anyone who was born after 1960 won't collect their full can't collect the full Social Security benefit till age 67. They can also wait till 70 if they wanted to get more. But that normal Social Security retirement age has moved since the legislation in New Hampshire back in '89. Our language in the statute, when it was put in, says age 65. It does not tie it to the Social Security age, which this bill would do. This is a proposal that has been introduced in recent years. It was supported by the Decennial Commission in 2017, and obviously, because people would be getting a slightly larger benefit for a couple more years, there is a cost associated with that. So the retirement system doesn't have a position on, on the policy of whether to do this or not, but we're just, testifying for informational purposes.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Carlin. Are there any questions from the committee? Mr. Carlin, it seems that the way that the language is written, age 65 is crossed out, and it says the member's full retirement age for Social Security. Is that age 67?
Yes, yeah, it is currently, by not designating age 67, I think, at least in prior iterations of this bill, the intention was if Congress were to reform Social Security again and push the retirement ages farther back, then the NHRS recalculation would tie to whatever future increases in the retirement age there on the federal level.
Okay, I just have another question. So if we were to raise it, put here, instead of age 65, age 67, can you give us any kind of an idea what the impact would be?
Right now, it would be the same.
It would be the same.
It's the leaving it to the normal Social Security retirement age is sort of a preemptive, but it's speculative if and whenever Congress would change that.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Carlin. Next, we have Brian Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to be back here instead of on a box in front of my laptop. So, for the record, Brian Hawkins. I'm here representing NEA New Hampshire. Mr. Carlin covered a lot of my testimony, so I won't repeat it in terms of the history and facts. But for FY20, according to the retirement system, for the teacher group, the average, which makes up 36% of the beneficiaries, was $22,466. So just to give you an idea of the 10% difference for those up to 2 years, what that could mean, and particularly because of the recent rise in inflation, and we all know that there's been we've only had the one COLA to base over the last 10 or 11 years. This could mean a really important piece to a teacher's pension. They can plan that they'll have that additional dollars for the short period of time to be able to plan for that. As you know from serving on the Decennial Commission, they did consider doing away with this entirely. That understandably would have been a prohibitive cost. I think it was something almost $800 million liability, and that was five years ago, I think now. So ultimately, they did land here in saying, going forward, let's move it to the 67 or the normal age of Social Security. That was a 10-4 vote by the Decennial Commission, and as Mr. Carlin said, in terms of the policy of this has actually been endorsed previously in iterations in the House in the past, and so we would ask you to do the same, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Hawkins. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to Senate Bill 434? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We're going to go ahead and open the public hearing on Senate Bill 411 FN and recognize the prime sponsor, our own Senator Kavanaugh again.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Kevin Kavanaugh, representing Senate District 16, the towns of Bow, Candia, Dunbarton, Hooksett, and Manchester Wards 1, 2, and 12. This bill requires a critical incident stress management debriefing following certain emergency service incidents. The bill also establishes a retirement system benefit for Group 2 members retired due to a violent act injury. I know we had a similar bill, and I just think it's very important that we keep this going forward. I know it needs work. I've talked to a lot of different groups, and going on what Mr. Carlin said last year about the waiver for Officer Doherty and going through that process. I just think it was critically important that we keep something going as a placeholder, and this bill could do that to make sure if it doesn't come out the way we want, that we can at least try to amend this bill and work to address all those issues that we talked about with the violent act. I'm glad to take any questions for it. Again, I know it needs work. I know there's an expense to this, but again, it's very important for the police officers and being so young and what they go through for the rest of their lives and be able to support and have benefits for their families is very important to me, and I know most people here. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? I would like to say that I've made a commitment that we're going to hold this bill because the officer is going to be going through a board process, and we're going to wait to see what happens with the board process. So we are going to hold this bill as long as we possibly can and use this as a vehicle if we need to.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, next we're going to call Marty Carlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, for the record, Marty Carlin representing the New Hampshire retirement system. NHRS doesn't have a position on this specific bill. The level of disability benefits would be a policy decision up to the legislature. As Senator Kavanaugh acknowledged, that if I can quote him, this bill does need some work. We have several technical issues with the ability to administer it as written if it was passed. It appears to be a lot of language lifted from some pending Massachusetts bills for their disability, and it uses terms and refers to entities that don't exist in New Hampshire. So there would be some work involved in that, and be glad to answer any questions about NHR's disabilities in general.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Carlin. Next, we're going to call Jim Demers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, my name is James Demers. I'm here today on behalf of the New Hampshire Police Association. And first, I want to thank you and the committee for the bill that came forward last year, even though it was retained. Senator Carson's bill, Senate Bill 153, was really aimed at the situation that Dan Doherty brought to light. As you may remember, he is a Manchester police officer who was violently injured near death. And because, you know, he was extremely young and new in that position, when calculating his income for benefits because he is, you know, disabled, it's a very low number. And that number really has a negative impact on the benefits that he can receive and his ability to go out and earn additional income. So, as Senator Carson indicated, she had a good conversation, I think, with the retirement system when that bill was before you. They indicated that there is a waiver process that can be used so that a retiree who has extreme circumstances can go before them for a hardship review. Dan Doherty is going through that. So, as Senator Carson said, we have agreed that this bill should be held, and let's see how that waiver process takes place, and if there is a need afterwards for some type of tweaking, this could be the vehicle. I will say that this particular bill was introduced at the request of a police union. We have consulted with that union as well. They are on the same page with holding this and seeing, you know, where the Dan Doherty review goes. So we appreciate your willingness to do that. I will say too that the first part of this bill, the critical incident stress management piece, I have heard from several people who are completely confused about what this would do, what impact it would have. I'm not sure it's ready for prime time, that particular piece. So our focus is on the second part of this bill only. And I think if there is a need to do something in the first piece, we'll certainly follow up with you on that as well. But you know, I just want to emphasize that Chief Goldstein and others, as you know, are experts in this particular area. They have kind of expressed some concerns about the way it's written. So I'm not sure it's needed at this point, but we'll keep you apprised.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to Senate Bill 411? Sir, please come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Justin Breton, B-R-E-T-O-N. It's my partner, Patch. He's trained in crisis response and therapy work. I'm the full-time mental health and wellness coordinator.
Oh, sir, could you turn on your mic and reintroduce yourself again, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. Is that better?
That's better.
All right. My name is Justin Breton. I'm the mental health and wellness coordinator at the Manchester Police Department. My partner is Patch. We're trained in crisis response and therapy work. I'm here today just to speak possibly as a matter of education and as a member. He can be very distracting. I'm here primarily to speak in regards to my concerns for the first portion of the amended changes. I am the coordinator for our critical incident stress management and peer support team, as well as the co-coordinator with Chief Goldstein on our Southern Regional Critical Incident Stress Management and Peer Support team. We currently are working with an average of 140 sworn and civilian law enforcement personnel that are trained in peer support across the state. There's very significant efforts to regionalize those teams. Most recently, December 17th, we had a meeting with 26 different law enforcement agencies from all over New Hampshire to start regionalizing our peer support efforts and making sure that law enforcement agencies of all sizes, from one officer all the way up to 375, have the adequate mental health support services that they need. So I've been involved with this process since 2012 when Senator D'Alessandro worked with Chief Mara and members of the Manchester Police Department to draft this statute
Okay.
and put it into place. And I just wanted members of the committee to understand that some of the language and proposed changes to this statute are not considered best practice. They would be against recommendations of ICISF, the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, who is legislatively the agency that's mandated that we all receive training from. To mandate these critical incident stress debriefings would be not advantageous, and quite frankly, it would open up a huge liability for the state. ICISF says that this process should not be mandatory. It's a voluntary process, just like any form of mental health support service, and to mandate that could be extremely dangerous and detrimental to the first responder community. So I think we need to be very careful when looking at mandating that. I think one other piece of this is critical incident stress debriefings are not the end-all be-all, and they're not the solution for all first responder mental health and wellness. I think it needs to be looked at as a tool, and that's exactly how ICISF trains us to view this support service, is that it's one tool in the toolbox. It doesn't prevent PTSD, it doesn't fix PTSD, it's merely a support service that can help you get through your exposure to a critical incident. So it's very important to consider that. There's many different forms of mental health support services out there, as you are all very well aware of, but not each are the perfect fit for everybody. And to mandate that on the first responder community could be extremely dangerous. So just wanted to speak to that. I spoke with Chief Goldstein, as did Mr. Demers, and I think that we are all in agreement that this isn't ready for prime time, and specifically in regards to the changes to the critical incident stress management piece. I think that there would be a lot of support, both from state police and from Mark Prue, who manages the Granite State peer support team. If we were to all come together, I think we all agree that there are some changes that could be made to that statute to better support our retired first responders. That has been a conversation that's been ongoing, but those changes are not mentioned in this current draft. So if the committee would be willing, I know there's a lot of interested parties that would be willing to help and really create something that would be in the best interest of our New Hampshire first responders.
Thank you very much for your testimony. As I've said, we're going to be holding this bill for as long as we possibly can to allow Officer Doherty to go through the process. But if you've got a working group that are looking at the benefits for a retiree dealing with stress, and we've got a vehicle that we can use for that as well. So please continue that work, and if you get something that you would like to give to us, we do have a vehicle that we can use.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
You're welcome. Are there any further questions? Senator Kavanaugh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just that you're 100% right, and I don't want to change anything, just to try to be supportive of anything that you, the experts, come up with to help all first responders. And anything I can do, let me know. It's just a step, and again, anything I can do, please let me know.
Absolutely, and I think it's blatantly apparent that with all the drafted changes, I think the mental health and wellness and there's a clear showing of support for New Hampshire's first responders with both proposals, and so I think that that's important to note. Also, we very much appreciate the support and willingness to advocate for the supports and mental health treatment that we all recognize we need to have in place. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Are there any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to Senate Bill 411? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and the committee will be in recess for 2 minutes. Oh, okay, I will make sure our secretary gets them, and everyone will get them. That dog is so cute. Did he take the dog? No, I want to come and see the dog. Sometimes we do get to see them when they came in. A few years ago when we did our state dog.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and my fellow members of the Senate ED&A Committee. For the record, I'm Denise Ricciardi, the Senate for District 9. Today I'm introducing SB 383 relative to land surveying services. This bill aims to accomplish three things on behalf of the land surveying industry. The first issue deals with right of entry. This legislation is looking to create the extension of liability to municipalities and private landowners as a result of municipal zoning and planning regulations that do require surveyors to enter onto abutting properties to collect data in order to comply with the municipal and state data collection requirements. The notification and identification aspect will alleviate any confusion as to who is on the property and for what purpose. It will also make it clear to the property owner that they would not be liable for any injury and would also have clear recourse for damages that may occur. As of right now, there is no protection for a municipality or private abutter. And while some landowners may oppose this bill, let's be clear that this legislation does not take their rights away, but reinforces their civil protections. Our bill would place the liability squarely on the shoulders of the surveyor and would eliminate any liability to the municipality and abutter. This would also allow for disciplinary action against the licensed surveyor or their agent if they are in violation of this law, and would also recourse to an abutter for damages. The second issue my legislation deals with is private cause of action. As we know, the Attorney General is responsible for enforcing the laws of the state. Unfortunately, we also know at times they are overwhelmed with cases. This bill provides for a civil money penalty or monetary enforcement that can be levied onto unlicensed practitioners that hold themselves out as licensed or adverse services they may be licensed for. This would allow for significant consumer protection and allow for the enforcement of current statutes. This protects New Hampshire property owners and consumers from unlicensed individuals that are currently offering low-cost services that ultimately are not what the client believes them to be. Lastly, this bill looks at the issue of non-resident licensure. The New England region is very small in area, and there are several instances where a person may live in Vermont, Massachusetts, or Maine and work for a company that practices exclusively in New Hampshire. This could be a significant hindrance to the individual, the company they work for, and the profession as a whole due to the limiting of an already small pool of potential land surveyors. If we want this profession to grow and thrive, we must look to the next generation of surveyors that may be willing to commute across state lines in order to obtain opportunities. This change will make it easier for land surveyors in neighboring states to more easily obtain a New Hampshire license as long as the applicant met the requirements for licensure as set forth by our statutes. I will defer to the experts that are behind me for any questions that you may have, and thank you for your time and consideration of the bill.
Thank you very much, Senator. Are there any questions for Senator Ricciardi? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we're going to call Michael Porter. You got to press the button.
There we go. Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable committee members. My name is Michael Porter, and I am an Administrator 3 Investigations Bureau Chief for the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. I'm here on behalf of OPLC to support this bill, especially where it relates to the enforcement aspect. Right now, there are criminal penalties for unlicensed or unauthorized practice. However, in many cases, we may not receive that complaint until well after the statute of limitations has expired for a Class B misdemeanor. The statute of limitations is 12 months. I believe we had a case in the last year or two where there was an unlicensed land surveyor who partook in activities in New Hampshire, it was sent to the Attorney General. Due to the statute of limitations, there was nothing they could do. We then took a look at our statute to see if the administrative body had any oversight or enforcement provisions, and there were none. So this individual was able to come into New Hampshire unlicensed and practice. I think some of the goals, I did submit written testimony, so I'm not going to read it to you, but there are some highlights that I think are very important. And I think the Senator spoke about consumer confidence is key here. When you have licensees in the state of New Hampshire who are doing their job only to be undermined by an unlicensed individual with no repercussions, it essentially erodes the profession. It takes the trust of the consumer away for even those who are licensed. I can tell you as well that when you look at the statute for land surveyors, there really is no language that deals with statute of limitations, but then we look to RSA 541A, the Administrative Procedure Act or Practice Act, and there we have a 5-year statute of limitations. So if an individual comes in and is unlicensed through the Administrative Procedures Act, we can do a look back to 5 years. So we would have the jurisdiction that the criminal penalties would not provide for. In this bill also, there is a $10,000 civil penalty, and I can tell you the importance. You're looking to dissuade a person from coming in. I will give you a few examples right now of where criminal penalties didn't apply, but administrative procedures did. One was in a Board of Medicine case that we successfully prosecuted. An individual who had a nutrition store and was bringing females into the back room and doing examinations. This person was not a licensed medical doctor. We were able to work in conjunction with law enforcement to not only make the criminal investigation, but we brought this case before the Board of Medicine where this individual was found to have violated, issued a $50,000 civil penalty along with civil injunctions through the Attorney General. Real estate in New Hampshire, the Real Estate Practice Act does also account for unlicensed practice. There are a lot of people that come in predominantly for commercial transactions, but they come across state borders unlicensed, and those penalties call for injunctive relief, cease and desist, and or a civil remedy, which is $10,000 or the economic gain or benefit that the licensee was able to take. We did have a case where an individual came in from several states away, took part in a pretty good-sized commercial transaction, and we were able to claw back some of that. The Board of Veterinary Medicine has a statute as well, which calls for civil penalties. If somebody was to inject a biologic into another person's family pet, and that person's not a veterinarian, yes, there are criminal penalties, but again, if we're going up against the statute of limitations, we do have administrative remedies of a $2,000 fine, and I believe up to $200 per day that person practices. These are just a few of the examples that we have successfully prosecuted as a result of statutes like this. I also do want to say that the goal at the end of the day, though, also is if the person, even if they're administratively fined, if they meet the criteria and they come before the board to obtain licensure, we also encourage that. So we do support this. It is another arm to protect the public health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Mr. Porter, I am looking at, on page 3, the section dealing with the non-resident licensure beginning on line 6. And what I'm concerned about begins on line 9, section 1. Do you think it would be appropriate to insert the words "in good standing"? We want to make sure if an individual is coming from another state and with a license from another state that they're in good standing within that state and just be able to have that information in front of you when you're looking at issuing a non-resident license.
I think that would be a perfect remedy because we do that from just about all the boards that we currently have.
Right. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we're going to call Natch Grays. Did I get that correct? Nate, okay.
It's a bit odd. Nate Grace for the New Hampshire Municipal Association. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. I did submit written testimony that you should have received via email, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions. NHMA is officially neutral on this bill, but I did want to echo something Senator Ricciardi said, which is that one of the important aspects of this bill is it removes municipal liability from these type of activities. So one of our concerns is a U.S. Supreme Court case that came out a couple years ago, Nick versus Township of Scott, Pennsylvania. And in that case, the municipality had enacted an ordinance which allowed municipal officials to walk across individuals' properties in order to assess whether they have a cemetery and then kind of record that cemetery. And that occurred. It ended up going up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that that was a taking under the takings provision of the Fifth Amendment. Based on our reading of this bill, what it would do is shift any sort of liability that might exist. We don't think any does exist, but any liability that might exist onto the surveyors, because of course they're not acting as municipal agents, they're acting in their professional capacity. They're not being sent out there specifically by the municipality. But ultimately we think that this, because it's a statewide right of entry, shifts any sort of risk of liability from the municipalities onto the surveyors and the state as appropriate. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Jason Stock.
Still getting used to the new system here.
We all are.
For the record, good morning. My name is Jason Stock. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. Our members own and manage timberland across the state, own and manage, I think conservatively, about 1 million acres. We also have within our membership loggers, foresters, as well as wood processing facilities. And yes, we do even have a couple surveyors. And so we've reviewed this bill, and I've come today to express our concern and opposition to Section 2, right of entry. For us, when we looked at this as an association and reviewed it, we looked at it and said, all right, you know, a fundamental property right is the right to prevent access onto property. And we looked at this as an infringement on that right. Why would someone want to prevent access onto your property? Well, there's a privacy issue. I may have something on my property that I really don't want to advertise for any host of reasons. I don't want people out there coming and looking at that and observing it. The second thing that we looked at is what, and the question that we asked ourselves is, what has changed so significantly in the state of New Hampshire that we need to make this shift on this property right? You know, what has changed that has caused this? I understand, and I heard from the testimony earlier, that there's municipal planning and zoning requirements that are causing or requiring individuals to go onto other people's property and gather data. And again, I would argue that that is really part of the problem. The nub of the problem is that you're, you know, obligating gathering of data off of private property. And I think that's a whole other kettle of fish. But for us, it was, you know, kind of giving up this property right is a real concern of ours. You know, also a couple specifics. The way the bill reads, there's an attempt to be made, there's an attempt to be made to contact the landowner by either phone or email. So does that mean I call and leave a message? Hey, I'm going to be out there on Wednesday. I leave it on the home answering machine, and I've satisfied or checked that box off. Now I have a right of entry onto that property because I've made the phone call. Email addresses, as we all know, can be difficult to obtain. Also, ownership. You have land, there are, as you all know, there are many forms of land ownership. Tenants in common. You have a situation where you have an ownership, tenants in common, multiple owners. Is there an obligation that they call and leave a message or speak to every single one of those owners? What if the land's owned by a family trust that's managed by an attorney out of Boston? Do they have to call the family owner? Do they call the attorney in Boston? And so those were just some of the kind of mechanical issues that we saw with the bill and with the requirement. The other piece is that when we look at this, it grants a right of entry, and we think in terms of woodlands in timberland. And I will say here today, most of our members allow access on their property. They don't post the property, and they allow access. And I think there's a very important difference. Someone's walking across my property, that's one thing. When they're on my property gathering data, that gets a little bit more intrusive, and that raises red flags. And then what if they're up and around my homestead? And okay, they leave a voicemail message, and now they're in my backyard or on my driveway. And I say, hey, what are you doing? Hey, I have a right to be here. According to the statute, I have a right to be here. I left a voicemail. And so, again, not to belabor this, but for us, this is a big issue for us. I've had conversations with the lobbyists from the Surveyors Association and have tried to, and we're willing to look at, see if there are ways to try to address this issue. But, and if there's creative ways, perhaps if access is absolutely essential and you have a landowner that's reluctant, are there ways through the court system that access could be petitioned and granted? That's one solution that we could look at, where you have a petition. You could get a justice to say, all right, you have to have that information, therefore, and that landowner's reluctant or refusing to give you that. Or if there's, again, if there's a request for data and access, and this could be at the municipal level, and access is, the surveyor cannot obtain the approval from that landowner to gather that data. Is there a mechanism to say, all right, when you prepare your plan, you make a note, access was not granted, and that just becomes a part of the file, and the plan gets submitted absent that piece of information. Again, recalling that this is information that's being gathered from neighbors, not the target parcel. And so I understand it. The town wants, if you're seeking a site plan and they want to know where the wetlands are, whatever on that property, yes, you're in the soup, you're getting that application. But when you start looking at my property, how far does the wetland go over onto Jason's property? That's, again, for us, cause for concern. I will, like I said earlier, we're happy to continue these conversations, but I just wanted to come today and raise this concern and express our opinion on the bill. The other sections, the landowner liability, certainly we're supporting that. We certainly support the licensing piece and protecting landowners from an unscrupulous or dishonest individual out there that may be misrepresenting themselves. Absolutely, that piece is solid. We're there. Right of entry is the concern. I'll conclude my comments and I'll try to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? I have a question, maybe a question and a comment. When we dealt with this issue a few years ago with the Northern Pass, there were a lot of land surveyors who were out and doing whatever they do, which is very, very important. we had a lot of complaints. That was one of the things that the property owners complained about, where people were coming on their property. They had no idea who they were, what were they doing here. We had no idea. So if I remember correctly, and I'll have to go back and look at the statute, we required that if they were going to go on to a private property, that they had to send notification via certified mail that had to be signed, and they had to return it. So they knew, somebody there at that property knew. They also had to, at the time that they were going to perform the process or whatever they were doing, they had to go up physically up to the building of the person who was living there and knock on the door and make them aware that they were there. And I noticed in here that they have to carry proper identification, so on and so forth. So that way the property owner, if they lived on that particular property, which most people did, they knew that somebody was on there, they knew the purpose of what they were doing there. Do you think something like this would help this process?
I'd have to take a look at that, and
Okay.
recognizing Northern Pass, and we were not as engaged in that as some of the other kind of forestry organizations, highly controversial.
Yeah.
The other piece was there was the specter of eminent domain kind of hanging over that as well, and whether there was an obligation or whether you could refuse entry because there was that question about whether eminent domain was coming into play. I recall people getting phone calls from people saying, hey, can I tell this person they can't come on my property because this is an eminent domain type program? So again, we'd be happy to kind of explore all that with you further.
Okay.
And I think, to your point, I think, there's a common courtesy here too. Knocking on the door and having that conversation, or a return receipt. So it's not just a voicemail.
Right.
I know our home voicemail system, I think we abandoned that a while ago, but someone could leave a message there and say, okay, I checked the box, I wore my orange vest and I had my badge on, I'm good to go, I'm free to enter this property, whether the landowner cares or not. And again.
Well, the other reason I bring it up is my property, we abut conservation land that's behind my home. And whenever the state goes in there to do anything, I get a certified letter from the state notifying me that they were going to be on the property at this time, at this date, around this time. So if I happen to be home and I look up and I saw somebody behind my house, I had an idea that, okay, this time, this date, it's someone from the state working, doing whatever they needed to do. So that, I think, gives a comfort level to the property owner that they can see something else is going on around you. And that might be something that might work in this situation, is to have that formal notification, that record for the homeowner and for the land surveyor. We sent you the letter, you signed that you received it. If you have an issue, usually there's something in there that says if you don't want us to come on your property, notify us. Please respond to us. And so there might be something in there that will allow a property owner to refuse the right of refusal and to notify them. But I also agree that if it is critical that this property be surveyed, and the property owner says no, that there has to be some sort of process in place that will allow the surveyor to go onto the property. And it might very well have to be some sort of court process, and we'll have to lay that one out too as well.
No, I again, be happy to have those conversations with you and explore all this further. But I thank you for your time this morning. And the only last thing I would add is, is that when it comes to certified mail, I know I've been in other debates or discussions around notifying neighbors with certified mail. I think in the cost question always comes up. And I think it's important that, these are projects that are being done. And if I'm a neighbor, it's not me asking for this. And so the cost just needs to be built into that. I mean, someone's doing something on their property, okay, build that into your project cost and, at least afford me the courtesy, like you said, of, in your case, notifying you, even if there's something's happening next door. So Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair will call William Doucette.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is William Doucette. I am the chairman of the Board of New Hampshire Land Surveyors, the Licensing Board. I'm here to speak on in support of this proposed bill. Relative to the right of entry, I'm not going to repeat what's already been discussed, but just to give you a little bit of insight on the frequency of entry. I've participated in over 7,000 surveys, and the vast majority of those required entry onto an abutting property owner. Whether it's a single-family house lot survey, just trying to do a boundary survey, a large subdivision, a route survey for a municipality such as a water line improvement, a utility line, they all require access to the abutting property. So the way it is done today is at times municipalities are willing to send notice. Let's say you've got a 2-mile water line. Some municipalities will send notice to those landowners. Some municipalities will not. In that case, at times we do. I would say percentage-wise, and this is an estimate, that statewide surveyors are not notifying the landowners. They are entering the land without permission. That's how it's occurring today. And oftentimes, I worked in the field for a number of years, and you'd knock on the door, no answer, and inevitably, as soon as you stick a shovel in the ground trying to find a monument, a car pulls in the driveway. And so that's when you put on your friendly hat and approach the landowner and try to be as pleasant as possible. That situation has gotten more difficult in the last couple of years. And so we make sure that all our staff have name tags and identification and be as careful as possible. I think this bill helps provide procedures for the profession on how to address this situation. Moving on to the private cause of action. As a member of the Board of Licensure, we often see complaints from citizens of unlicensed, either offering unlicensed practice or actual unlicensed practice. Our board has no jurisdiction over that whatsoever. That is passed off to the Attorney General's office. We offer technical support. I think as evidence of their workload, our offer of technical support is not relied on. It's not requested. I'm speculating there's just not time. So we do not hear of the complaint again until we understand what the results are, and we do not see positive results that will help protect the public. The addition of monetary penalty, the board feels could offer a significant incentive to discourage unlicensed practice. Relative to non-residents licensure, this is not proposing any change to the minimum requirements for licensure. The only difference is we're no longer going to say no because you sleep in a state other than New Hampshire. That's what this change is about. There are several cases currently where there's one in Kittery, where a person lives in Kittery. He has worked his entire career in Portsmouth. That firm does the majority of their work in New Hampshire. He has no experience in Maine. The current law states that he shall first get licensed in Maine before he can apply for a license in New Hampshire. It makes no sense. He's perfectly qualified. He meets all our qualifications. We have to say no to him. That's That's my testimony. I have this, I can share this in print if that's helpful.
Thank you very much for your testimony. If you have written testimony, please hand it to Ms. Wheeler, and we will all get a copy of it. Are there any questions for the? I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to call Mark Kondrametraki. Did I get that? Did I do okay with that? Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Kondrametraki, so you were very close.
Yeah, kind of. But I think you're being kind.
I'm the Government Affairs Director for the New Hampshire Land Surveyors Association, and I'm here to testify in favor of and offer my support for the legislation that's in front of us today, which is specifically Senate Bill 383. We have to keep in mind that real estate is one of the main drivers of the New Hampshire economy. Surveying is an extremely important aspect of the real estate transaction. Whether it's determining property boundaries, verifying title for real estate transfers, or determining areas of parcels for the levying of taxes, everything in between, surveying is a major aspect of the New Hampshire real estate economy. In many cases, while performing standard surveying duties, a land surveyor has to cross on abutting properties to collect required data, just as Mr. Doucette had mentioned. This is actually a state ethical practice requirement, and it's laid out in the New Hampshire Administrative Rules for land surveyors under Land 50201B3. And it says specifically, record evidence of tracts other than the subject tract and abutting tracts shall be examined, or additional information sought which might relate to the property lines and corners being surveyed whenever necessary. Additionally, that aspect of the ethical requirement also states, a field investigation shall accompany the record research and evaluation. Furthermore, in the course of working with a client, a surveyor may be mandated by a municipality to access an abutting property to collect data required for preparation of subdivision, site plan, or zoning exhibits. Surveyors are the only profession that are asked to perform potentially unethical and possibly unconstitutional tasks while conducting their work. This opens the surveyor, the municipality, the abutter, and all parties involved up to significant liability issues. This right of entry legislation will resolve a lot of these issues and eliminate the potential liability to fall back on the community or municipality. As the New Hampshire Municipality Association stated, as Mr. Graves said, this right of entry would address any concern raised by the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in 2019 of a municipal taking. I also want to be clear that this is not a taking of some party's property rights. This is a very narrow legislative effort. It's specific to clearing up this liability issue. The property rights sometimes were affected once local planning boards adopted some of these zoning amendments and requirements. And a lot of that occurred at public hearings. Most of these ordinances had to be adopted at public hearings and by public vote. As a large tract landowner myself, I own a large tract of land in central New Hampshire in Belmont. The reality is, just as Mr. Stock had mentioned, people are going on our property all the time, whether it's to recreate, whether it's to investigate or hike around or do whatever, whether it's to live in a cabin on a river like River Dave. People are constantly going on large tracts of land. And how would we know? I typically go out and cruise my property once a year with my dog, and we go out and go around. In the last couple of years, I've noticed that there's been surveying work done on an abutting property to mine. And I noticed that because there were fresh blaze marks on trees on my property. I had no idea what's being done. I had no notification of who went on my property. The abutter is a large corporation. I tried to contact them to no avail. This legislation would help correct that, so that, large tract and property owners would be notified ahead of time. I also want to make clear that it is already currently an ethical standard for surveyors to notify property owners before going on their property. The other thing to keep in mind is that every other state in New England, as well as the state of New York, has a right of entry law. And it does affect the municipal liability protection, as Mr. Gray spelled out in that Supreme Court ruling. And to my knowledge, there have been no major issues or problems with any of those laws in any of those states. As far as the violations and penalties aspect for this legislation, this is really much needed. As stated previously, surveying plays a significant role in the New Hampshire real estate economy. Technology, overburdening of enforcing parties, these all result in instances where people are going to get away with holding themselves out as something they are not. And the loser in this scenario is not just going to be the consumer, but it's going to be the New Hampshire court system and the budget. Because ultimately, the decision of legal property boundaries lies in the hands of the court. And what we're going to see is unlicensed work that, as people become more confrontational, are going to end up in the court systems, and it's going to create significant problems with our system that's really going to cost taxpayers a significant amount of money. The third aspect of this legislation is the residency requirement. Our world and our region is growing smaller, and the pool of candidates to enter the surveying field is growing smaller, just as was mentioned earlier. Residency shouldn't be a roadblock to licensure if you're qualified. And in fact, land surveying seems to be the only profession that requires the residency for their initial licensure. Physicians, engineers, attorneys, landscape architects, and so on do not have a residency requirement for initial licensing in this state. So by striking this aspect of the law, we're basically bringing the land surveying profession in line with all of the other state licensing requirements. And we're allowing the board to determine the eligibility of licensure based on experience and not residency. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions you have and provide any other information.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Next, we're going to call Robert Johnson. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning. Good morning, committee. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Rob Johnson, and I'm here representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as the Federation's Policy Director. And I'm speaking here in opposition solely to the Section 2, the right of entry portion of the legislation. This piece of the bill really grabbed our attention. The right to exclude is a fundamental element of property rights. The U.S. Supreme Court has specifically mentioned this right in a property owner's bundle of rights. And we believe strongly that this right should not be abridged, will only be abridged when there's no other option. That's the highest bar is set. It's been demonstrated to you previously, and you'll hear more, I believe, that there are other remedies. And it shouldn't be abridged as a convenience. And we asked the question, as Mr. Stock asked earlier, really what has changed? We've gotten this far in our history without this right of entry. And my understanding is that there's a right of entry in only half the states. And again, I would submit that it seems to be more of a convenience in those situations where there is an issue, there is a process. And I guess we'd just ask you to, before you give this right away, be very, very cautious. And just think about yourselves as landowners, or if you want a landowner, if you own a piece of land that you know, your right to say to someone to leave your property, and that for some reason, if you in the situations where you can't, needs to be very, very narrowly drawn. And I say this to you that in the people that I represent, a Farm Bureau is an organization of just under 2,000 family memberships, and another 1,000 are businesses and other supporters. And I mean, it's part of our policy to promote public access to our lands. Many of our members have public access snowmobile trails for horses, walking, and such. So again, I please ask you to just keep that into consideration as you go through this process. And as always, I thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we're going to call Dennis McKenney. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator. My name is Dennis McKenney. I live over in Bennington, New Hampshire, which is a small town in Hillsborough County. I'm both a licensed forester, and I've been a licensed land surveyor for 35 plus years. My thanks to each of you for your service to the citizens of the state. I am in support of two portions of this proposed legislation. The first being allowing non-resident individuals to apply for licensure in the state of New Hampshire. I see no reason why that should not be allowed. And I am in support of allowing our Board of Licensure the ability to pursue those who are unlicensed. However, I have a lot of heartburn over this right of entry issue. So far, we've not heard any testimony indicating that this has prevented people from accomplishing their work. And in the course of my career, I've had only several instances. I can think of only 3 where where the right of entry was contentious. And in each case, in several of those cases, it required 911 calls. I don't think if I had a business card that cited a statute that allowed me the right of entry to the property, and I presented it to these individuals in those cases, that it would have made any difference at all. In fact, I think it might have actually inflamed the situation even further. So far, in my practice, the status quo has been adequate. I have used face-to-face contact with people many, many times, and generally it works quite well. On rare occasions, I have, in fact, I can only think of one occasion where I actually sent formal notice to individuals who abutted the property to let them know that I was going to be surveying in the area. And that was a situation where it was I would call it an urban residential area that backed up to a city park in Claremont, and it was necessary for me to run through a lot of backyards, and obviously was prudence dictated that I should let these people know who I was, when I would be there, and why. And I do have the option of requesting of the local police to come and do a civil standby if a situation is particularly contentious. Earlier, it was mentioned that lines are blazed and painted, and landowners are not notified. That's not a practice limited only to surveyors. I believe our forester licensing statute allows for a forester to do boundary maintenance. I have done hundreds of miles of that work, not only on private property, but under contract for our state Fish and Game Department and for the Forest Service up in the White Mountains. And to my knowledge, no landowners were notified in those cases. Bear in mind that the comments that I'm making are from a surveyor and a forester who rarely works in downtown areas like Concord. So the issue of right of entry could be significantly different in an urban area. But I would caution the committee that the closer you get to someone's personal residence, I think the more careful you need to be about granting a statutory right of entry. It's one thing for me to be measuring along the roadside. It's quite another thing for me to be at the corner of someone's master bedroom window at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. That's a pretty touchy subject, and I don't think we want to carte blanche afford that right to land surveyors or necessarily anyone. I'll conclude now, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to Senate Bill 383? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thank you. There you go, John. Sorry. Because this is mine. Guess let me get my stuff put together.
Good morning, Senator Carson,
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
and please tell us about your Senate Bill 443.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Sharon Carson, and I have the pleasure of representing Senate District 14, comprising the towns of Londonderry, Hudson, and Auburn. And I have for your consideration this morning Senate Bill 443. And this bill requires three things. First, it requires the Building Code Review Board to approve local amendments to the state building code prior to their adoption and enforcement, and requires the board to maintain and publish a catalog of local amendments to the state building code and state fire code. Secondly, it requires the fire marshal to approve local amendments to the state fire code prior to their adoption and their enforcement, and requires that the fire marshal, with the assistance of the Board of Fire Control, to maintain and publish a catalog of local fire safety codes and ordinances. And finally, it prohibits municipalities from imposing a fee to appeal the decision of a code compliance official. The roots of this bill really came about a few years ago. We had a study committee dealing with our state codes and the adoption of amendments by municipalities and the problems that it was creating for people that worked in the trades as well as developers. Because what you ended up having was a patchwork of codes around the state. And one of the things we wanted to try to do was to create a sense of uniformity. So it didn't matter if you were, say, an electrician and you were coming to my house in Londonderry, you knew that the rules for installation or whatever work you were going to be doing was going to be the same as if you went to Bedford or you went up north to Berlin. And we discovered that through this study committee that was becoming a big problem because municipalities were just adopting ordinances And the State Building Code Review Board, as well as the Fire Control Board, had no idea that these amendments were being adopted. So that's why I was asked to bring in legislation because I chaired that committee, and I did, and that legislation was brought in, I believe, in 2019. It was retained, and then we got into COVID, and the bill did not make, even though it had passed the committee, it did not make it into an omnibus bill. So I was asked to bring this legislation forward again for consideration, and there are a number of individuals here to speak to the bill. I will say that the efforts that came out of this study committee are working wonderfully with bringing together our Fire Control Board, working with our State Building Code Review Board on these codes. We now have a plan. We're moving forward. It's become very successful. You don't see a lot of the contention that we used to see here in the legislature, and it's because we've got everybody working together, and we've got a system, and it's working very, very well. And I see this as a part of creating that system as we move forward. So thank you all very much, and I will try to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Steve Paquin.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for having me today. For the record, my name is Steve Paquin. I am the Vice President of the New Hampshire Building Officials Association. The New Hampshire Building Officials Association, NHBOA, supports consistent administration of the state-adopted building codes, and we support limiting local amendments of the state building codes. However, we do not support this bill as currently written. In 2019, as Senator Carson mentioned, there was a similar language proposed in Senate Bill 113, and two primary concerns that NHBOA had at that time in how it would work in conjunction with local amendments is still a concern that we have today with the bill that's written. Those specific concerns is each community is required to make specific amendments to the building code for their specific needs. Two examples. Permit fees. That's covered under Section 108 in the building code. Those fees are, they're bound to the community and the amount of work that they have, the amount of employment that they have that handle building permits. And it's really specific to that region, and we're just wondering, is that an amendment that's going to have to go back in front of the Building Code Review Board where it's specific to each community throughout the state? Another one is Table 301, R301.2. It sets the geographic and climate regulations for each building. Snow loads, wind loads, frost depth. They're very specific to regions in the state. Are all of those individual regulations, town by town, in that chart going to have to go back in front of the Building Code Review Board? The proposed amendment does not give a time frame in which the Building Code Review Board has to review these amendments for the towns, and that could cause a specific problem with the towns that have town meetings. There's certain dates in which amendments have to be proposed to the towns in time for those meetings to be put into warrant articles or whatnot. So what is the time frame going to be for which this can happen? With that, SB 443 could drastically increase the workload for the Building Code Review Board, which could already, at certain times of the year, especially November, December, when towns are starting to do their amendments, could be absolutely inundated with amendment changes individual towns may come up with. Reporting of local amendments to the BCRB is already required by state statute. It's RSA 674-51, Roman numeral 2. The problem with this is there's no enforcement mechanism to make municipalities do that. And if I think that One thing that could change in this bill, if there was an enforcement mechanism to make that communication happen between the municipalities and the Building Code Review Board, some of what we're seeing here and trying to correct with this bill may already be done. So NHBOA urges not passing Senate Bill 443 as written, because we believe that language could be made in such a way that it could work for everything to solve all the problems that may come up. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
So Steve, you didn't prepare any written testimony for this?
I have written testimony, but I am actually filling in for the president of the New Hampshire Building Officials. He had a conflict when this meeting was scheduled and wasn't able to be here.
So did he prepare any written testimony?
We have written testimony that I can give you, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Could you please make sure to give it to,
I will pass it along right there.
Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
your testimony. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna call, Miss Netch, is that correct? Natch?
Nature, like nature.
Nature, okay,
Yes.
Natch, okay, thank you. Sorry, we'll get you, we'll see you for, I'm sure we're gonna see you
You'll see me a lot.
I'm sure we're gonna see you consistently, and I'll finally get the hang of saying your name.
You will. We appear in front of your committee quite frequently, Senator. Again, I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We are opposed to this bill as written. My understanding just from earlier conversations is that someone may be proposing to convert this to a study committee. We would support that. The reason that we oppose this legislation as written is that approval process by the State Building Code Review Board and the State Fire Marshal's Office for code amendments. Already in statute, the state regulations are the minimum standards. So a municipality could enact stricter standards. As that's the case, we don't see the need to have that approval process. As mentioned by the New Hampshire building officials, many of these things are already required to be reported to the appropriate agencies. And it's really important to keep in mind that often these amendments that municipalities put in place, especially in the building code side of things, are targeted towards what their local conditions are. So something like the snow load or something like that is really going to be different up in the North Country rather than down in the southern part of the state. Obviously, the mountains see quite a lot more snow over a longer period of time, and so they're going to need to have stricter standards on that. And that's going to be a local adoption issue. And so for those reasons, we oppose this bill as written.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee?
And I'll just mention I did submit written testimony earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll make sure to have it. Next, we're going to call Gary Abbott. Welcome again, Mr. Abbott.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senators, again, for the record, my name's Gary Abbott. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Associated General Contractors of New Hampshire. I come here today in strong support of Senate Bill 443. I'm going to give you my history with Senate Bill 443 in the sense that I remember a meeting back in 2019 with former Fire Marshal Paul Parisi and a number of associations discussing the conflict that we were having between local codes, that we had a statewide building codes, and cities and towns were having their own codes, and some of these were conflicting and causing issues. How are we going to address it? I can tell you that very strong support of I think there's a lot of benefits to the construction industry as well as the municipalities. There may have been in the past a require for notification, but this actually is, if your town, and I will tell you part of that discussion that happened at the meeting, we want to make sure legally adopted municipal codes are sent forward to the statewide, the Building Code Review Board at the state level. This will benefit the construction industry in the sense that there'll be one resource to go to. We'll be able to look at the statewide building code and we'll be able to look at the local building codes in one shot. I like the review process, the idea of the building code review it, because there may be times in which the code's already covered, that the local adoption the review might be good for cities and towns. I will use the snow load that we're just talking about. When the statewide building code was first adopted many, many years ago, which I was part of, one of the things the Building Code Review Board tackled was the snow load and actually adopted changes to the snow load in its own act, in the code. So now it sounds like cities and towns are amending that version, because we were separating North Country above the notch to the central part of the state, the southern part of the state having different snow loads. So I think some of that's covered, but now I'm very curious as to what are cities and towns doing, amending that further, and whether it's completely necessary. And I think that's what this bill will do, in the sense it will start to have the experts on the Building Code Review Board or the fire code experts look at it. I know the approval process will be something that the committee and whatever you guys decide to do with the approval process, but I think the first step is getting them filed. We also know that there are sometimes recommendations by the town that are not necessarily legally gone through the process. And I think this will help with the argument that we might have with construction in the field. I don't see that anywhere in the code, and I don't see that really in a legally adopted amendment, because I think there are some determinations that are made based on the code book itself, and that's where appeals happen. I think this bill does a lot to go to that next step, kind of combining. Now, I don't think there'll be lots and lots of codes needed at the local level once we bring up the statewide building code this year. If the legislature adopts the latest code and we're only one code behind, I see less and less need for municipalities to adjust the code. And if we go with that process that I know Senator Carson has worked very hard on, there shouldn't be a lot of code changes through the process. So that's my take on it, why we support this bill. And I think it's in the right direction. I know we did get held up through the COVID time in the sense of discussing it and getting together, but really appreciate the effort that individuals have made to put this together. So we support this.
Thank you. Mr. Abbott, are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Matt Connors.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
Thank you all for having me. I'm the president of Gemini Electric out of Auburn, one of the constituents of Senator Carson. I'm also a member and vice president of Associated General Contractors, a member of the Electrical Contractors Business Association, and current chair of the State Electricians Board. And municipalities beating to their own drum, or a specific person all of a sudden has a bone to pick that pushes through an amendment, we've seen happen kind of on both sides of the state. One city on the seacoast got very carried away and due to a tragedy to an unlicensed person doing something and changed their code, added all sorts of things. That added a tremendous amount of cost to projects. And some of that was based on a single individual's thought that he knew better than the code. The same thing has occurred in our largest city a little bit, where the fire codes are stricter than needed. I've got bouts going with engineers that don't understand why that has to be dealt with. And then the city of Lebanon. I mean, they are very progressive in their pursuit of what they want. They pass and upgrade codes on their own prior to the state reviewing it, prior to it being accepted by the state. And it presents an issue of, where do we work, what do we do? The state live free or die is great, but on the other hand, if it costs a bunch of money and creates issues, enforcement-wise, the Electricians Board, we maintain a code cycle that when it's adopted by the legislature, it's then put in place and we enforce it. We also enforce licensing. And when you come up and it's what are we doing? Well, this guy requires this. Well, it's not enforceable yet. You can't have that. You can't have people doing what they want versus what the law is. The Building Code Review Board, once adopted, a municipality can't diminish a code. It can only increase it the proper way. If a code needed to be enhanced, I would think that during the review process and the amendment process, that would be done by the state. The review process is open to all municipalities and everybody in the state to comment on and to bring up the needs and the wants for it. We basically got to get a hold of what's going on, because the other problem is people come and go, people retire, people move on to different positions, and we're left to deal with the fallout. And that's a problem. And I think Bill 443 is a great start to having synergy in the state and cooperation amongst everybody and making the state a safer place. I'm for it, both as president of my company and the people I represent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from our committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next, we're going to call Sean Toomey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sean Toomey. I'm the State Fire Marshal. Thank you for having me today. Just conceptually, I would say we agree with the bill. And I'll speak more from the terms of the Board of Fire Control and myself as the Fire Marshal. I would say that it does help to eliminate the inspector issues and the consistency of enforcement, as we've heard a little bit about this morning. The concern I guess I have at this point is just the kind of the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of how the approval process will go. And just understanding what that has to do with the impacts on the boards. Are we gonna have to have public hearings with the boards and then have it bring it back to the general court for ratification? And what does that look like? Is it, if it was more of a verification process of was it properly vetted at the local level, does it create conflicts between the state building code or the state fire code, and then we catalog it? I think that makes a little bit more sense rather than the boards actually being the approval, because I'm not sure how each of the boards would decide whether it's approvable or not, or what the parameters of those approvals are. So I think as we proceed down this road, if this were to pass, is just understanding the mechanics of the approval. I was in communication with the Board of Fire Control, Chief Alan Clark, who wasn't able to be here today, and that was one of his biggest concerns as well from the Board of Fire Control, is just the mechanics of it, but he thought that they could support it as well. So I think that, most of us are comfortable of, was the local process followed? Was it vetted properly, or did some inspector just make it up? And if it's just made up and not properly vetted and adopted at a local level, that shouldn't be brought forward. And then does it create conflicts? We spent a lot of time over the last couple of years trying to minimize or eliminate the conflicts between the codes, and I think we need to continue to do that. One little other side note is that I think we need to do a little bit of cleanup of making sure that the fire code stuff stays with the Board of Fire Control, and then the building code stuff stays with the Building Code Review Board. But I guess that's all I have at this point. Happy to work with the stakeholders to try to figure out if we can come to some happy spot to make this work. But thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to go to Ari Pollock. Good morning.
Morning, Senator Carson, members of the committee. I am Ari Pollock of the Gallagher firm, here today on behalf of the home builders. We support the bill for many of the reasons that were already stated. Conceptually, it makes a great deal of sense to us, and we like the idea of some clearinghouse to vet local ordinances for compliance with the statewide codes, compliance with cross codes in terms of building and state codes and how they interrelate with each other. Our concern is simply, and it really boils down to this, great idea, but how's it going to work? And so my suggestion would be in sections 2 and 6 of the bill, where it talks about this process of review and approval of the local code. What standards will apply to that review? Similar to what Marshall Toomey was just talking about. Happy to do it, great idea, good for the state, good for builders, always want to know what the rules are and how to apply them. But what standards will they use? And if they were to refuse to allow adoption or enforcement of a local measure, what would be their justified reasons for doing so? Along the same lines, in those same sections, there's a determination that can be made by both of the boards for fire and for building as to whether that measure should be applied statewide or allowed to be applied statewide. The concern that we have there is that right now, when the Fire Control Board or the Building Review Board adopts an amendment to a statewide code, that amendment is pending ratification by the General Court, and it doesn't become effective until that ratification occurs. We would just be concerned that this approval of a local ordinance to apply statewide would be something of an end run around that ratification process. And I don't think that's the intention of the sponsors or the drafters, but we would want to be working with stakeholders and the committee members to come up with some way to circle back to that general court ratification step if it is in fact going to be applied statewide. In other words, treat it the same way as any other measure that would apply statewide. With those comments, we really do appreciate the concept behind the bill, and we're very willing to work with the committee members and stakeholders. We would oppose any suggestion of going to a study committee only because we've already had a few. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, and you're exactly correct. We've had a number of study committees on this issue.
And they were a lot of fun, but time to move on.
Okay, I'm not going to touch that one, but thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Bill, is it Frazier? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee members. My name is Bill Frazier. I'm President and CEO of Jaguar Electric. I'm a member of the ECBA, and I am the ECBA representative on the Building Code Review Board. I'm speaking on behalf of the Electrical Contractors Business Association today because the Building Code Review Board has not even had a chance to review this yet formally. The ECBA supports the bill in its intent. As Mr. Fleischer pointed out, there are some mechanical issues in how it would be applied and enforced, because the bill itself seems to give authority to approve or adopt amendments to the state building code back to the Building Code Review Board, which is not our process. All we can do is review and recommend to the General Court for ratification. So that is our concern. As far as timing for municipalities, I think by correcting some of the language in the base bill and having municipalities bring their proposed amendments back through the Building Code Review Board, the timing mechanism becomes very clear, because we have to submit our proposed amendment packages by November 1st of every year, so that municipalities can plan accordingly then. There would be a time frame mechanism they would have to be aware of. But like I said, we support the bill, and I don't want to call municipalities going rogue, but what really begs the question here, is it a state building code or is it a state building code recommendation? And I think it's a state building code. Municipalities don't create their own drinking age or driver's license age, and I think the building code is as important as those things. It needs to be applied uniformly statewide. I have no written testimony, but if you're interested, I did go through the bill and do some red lines on how I think we can consolidate the language and make it all work right. And that basically involves, I forget the specific sections in 155 and 674 that the process references. So
thank you very much for your testimony, and we will make sure that everyone gets a copy of it.
Yeah, and any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we are going to hear from Chris Gogland.
Good morning, Senator Carson and members of the committee. My name is Chris Skoglund. I'm the Director of Energy Transition with Clean Energy New Hampshire. I'm just new to the role. I've been previously with the state of New Hampshire for 14 years. So, Clean Energy New Hampshire is a nonprofit member organization. We are New Hampshire's leading clean energy advocate that is dedicated to supporting policies and programs that strengthen the economy by encouraging and promoting energy efficiency and the transition to renewable energy. So some of the comments that I'm going to share today, I had not previously raised when we did the study in 2018 or the study that we just completed. Clean Energy New Hampshire opposes Senate Bill 443 as written, primarily out of concern over issues of local control and out of concern for our municipal members. We have 22 municipal members, 6 of which, including Hanover, Lebanon, Claremont, and Nashua, Portsmouth, and Concord, which have established energy targets. These communities are looking to not just have targets for the municipal government and the school systems, but community-wide to reduce energy costs for those communities, for businesses, for residents, as well as their own municipal government, which would also have an impact on the environment. So we are concerned that as it's written, this would place an undue burden on their ability to adopt a newer energy code that would help them achieve those community-wide targets faster. New Hampshire lags the rest of the region being all of the Northeast and a great part of the Mid-Atlantic as well in terms of energy policy. And these towns are stepping out to help their constituents. When we transitioned to the 2015 Energy Code, there was a tremendous amount of savings that was realized for buildings built throughout the state, whether it's residential or commercial. The 2018 Energy Code, which will be coming before the General Court that has gone through the Building Code Review Board, offers only a small gain over that energy efficiency. The 2021 Code, the International Energy Conservation Code, has been found to be between 8 and 9% more efficient than the 2018 code. New Hampshire municipalities, under the current way that the Building Code Review Board is working, would not be eligible to adopt that for several years with the way that this bill is laid out. So we're suggesting that rather than, and recognizing that we do not want to have a patchwork of codes across the state, would it be prudent for municipalities to be able to adopt published chapters of the energy code in order to meet their energy targets? Because the buildings they're building now are going to be around for decades, and in fact, many of us live in homes in New Hampshire that are more than a century old. And the best time, the most cost-effective time to be putting in these energy projects is the moment that they are constructed. The letter that we've submitted goes into much more detail about the economics, and would be happy to work with the committee to describe this in more detail.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. And next we have Philip Sherman. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Carson, members of the board. My name is Philip Sherman. While I act as the chair of the Building Code Review Board, the schedule for this hearing prevented me from bringing it to the BCRB till tomorrow's monthly meeting. So I'm speaking as an individual and will bring up my concerns without offering conclusions. Some of these comments drill down on comments, I'll couch it the way Marshall Toomey did as the mechanics of how this would work. I'd ask you to consider the potential for the workload of the BCRB to exceed the capabilities of a board made up of volunteers, especially after each time that the state building code is updated, resulting in the need for each municipality to update their amendments, thereby requiring review by the board. Please consider the risk that volunteers are put in a position of certifying in some manner that a municipal amendment complies with the RSA requirement to be not less restrictive than the state code, and the confusion as to responsibility if there's an error. This is currently the responsibility of the municipality. Please consider that the language in HB 1681, which requires BCRB to post municipal amendments only after the municipality tells us about them, is not included in this legislation, so that would hopefully be coordinated. This leaves the BCRB in the position of searching for municipal amendments if a municipality violates RSA 67451, which currently requires them to tell us about them. Currently, a total of 2 municipalities in the state have forwarded their amendments to us. Please consider that the provisions for BCRB approval of statewide amendments conflict with the required need for amendments to be ratified by the General Court. Mr. Pollack spoke to that. It's a pretty broad issue just in terms of how this all fits together. And I don't believe that we're talking about the same process for our normal amendment process and this process, but that would need to be talked about. I agree completely with Marshall Toomey that fire stuff ought to stay on his side, and the Fire Control Board and Building Code ought to stay here. There's language that requires us to maintain records about the State Fire Code. The proposed legislation results in a move from simply reporting what municipalities report to the BCRB to some level of state control over what a municipality may adopt. Others have commented, is the intent that we're simply looking at them to make sure that they're more or less restrictive than the state code, or are we passing judgment on whether we think the amendment is a good idea? Please consider that there's a potential that a municipality may effectively adopt a newer model code, as was just mentioned, than the edition currently adopted by the state by amending the current code with dozens of amendments. So these codes, go through their lives through national model code amendments. And what do we do when somebody says, well, I'm not permitted to adopt the next edition of the code. I'll just amend the existing code with all the amendments that resulted in the newer code. I don't think they've thought about that yet, but they will. This would require a detailed comparison that the BCRB may not be staffed to provide. I'd ask that you consider the potential for delays, as was mentioned by others, between municipal adoption and BCRB review and posting, resulting potential design or construction errors due to the effectiveness at an unknown date of an amendment when it gets approved by the board. We would hope that there would be some consideration of the confusion that might result if a municipal amendment were to be denied by the board, resulting in an unenforceable ordinance that had been approved locally but could then not be enforced. And lastly, I'd ask you to consider that even under the current process, at least one municipality has adopted a newer model code, which may be in violation of existing state law. The enforcement of this issue is not thought to be within the scope of the BCRB. So these things sort of float out there. Again, I speak as an individual. However, this bill will be put before the BCRB at our monthly meeting tomorrow. Given the above concerns, I would ask that we be given sufficient time to work with the organizations represented on the BCRB, the stakeholders, and with the State Fire Marshal to return to you with proposed approach that addresses the above concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
We'll submit this in writing.
Yes, please, thank you. And we will all get a copy of that. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to Senate Bill 443? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing. Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Senator Kavanaugh, seconded by Senator Prentice. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're adjourned for the day. Thank you all.
Paul's daily page.